So I just thought I'd say it's quite incredible thinking about just how things have moved on with the low-carb, low-sugar approach to life. I remember getting a call from Rod 5 or 6 years ago now after I decided I read David Gillespie's book and decided that sugar was an issue and dared to publish this paper and got no response at all from the New Zealand side of things. To get a phone call from Rod and to get invited over here to speak was just a real shot in the arm, and to see things grow over the years I think is a testament to Rod's enthusiasm and others who are working away in their areas. And I think that idea of everyone sort of going back to their own place where they are and spreading the message is absolutely crucial. So yeah, I'm obsessed by numbers. I'm a sort of epidemiologist, biostats guy, and so sort of cell walls and pathways kind of make my eyes glaze over, but a good number is very exciting. Just to illustrate that, there was a statistician and a normal person, and they were both sentenced to death, and they were given one last wish, and the statistician, being true to his trade, said, "I want to give a 1-hour lecture on everything I know about biostatistics." The normal person said, the executioner said, well, Mr. Normal Person, what do you want to do? I think I want to die first. So I know that not everybody's into it, so I'll try and keep it light and hang on, let's see if we can move things along. So we're getting a crash course in epidemiology, a little case study that I was involved with. Grant got me involved in some subversive writing over in New Zealand about saturated fat, and a few little things that I've discovered away on my low-carb kind of journey. So what is epidemiology? It's this kind of science of study design. It has a complicated vocabulary, but I think actually the concepts are really basic if you kind of think about it like a car race. And I know when I was a kid, I used to lose sleep over which car was the better car. Was it a Holden or was it a Ford? I don't know if that's a pressing issue over here in Australia, but that certainly, consumed quite a bit of conversation time when I was a teenager. And I think basically that's the same idea when we do epidemiological studies. And, which of the two cars is going to win? Which of the two diets is going to be the most healthy? And what we've been doing mostly today, we've had a few numbers, but is looking under the hood and saying, well, this is how it works, and this is our understanding of how the gearbox works, this is how big the engine is, and this is how we think things are going to go. But that doesn't tend to excite me quite as much as biochemists and physiologists. I want to see whether one car is faster than the other. I'm not too much interested in what's under the hood. So the biological arguments, I think they're great, and I've learned a lot, and I've had to sort of backtrack on the biological arguments and my attitudes towards biological arguments, because I've found a lot of them to be very useful. And I thought it was great to hear Steve argue from a biological perspective in his book about the need to take salt because of the effect of the various hormonal changes that accompany ketosis. But what really sold me was when I met him in the airport and he showed me a paper showing all-cause mortality reducing as your salt intake increased. And that to me that's really good stuff when it comes to science. That's having a hypothesis generated from the biology and then confirming it with an epidemiological study with an important clinical outcome. So anyway, epidemiologists think that we need a race to know. And one of the key things about a race is that you always see that the cars, they report this, some measure of their progress, and that's speed. And in diet trials, ones with disease outcomes, we have a sort of similar idea about speed. We call this incidence, which is just the number of deaths or disease events that occur during a time of follow-up divided by the total population. It's kind of a speed of disease. And so here's an example. I don't think this study has ever been done, unfortunately, but one day it will, and will confirm my projected findings, I'm sure. But we have this population of 200 people. We randomise them into either high-fat or low-fat group, count the number of deaths at the end, and we calculate their speed of disease. And here it's 20 over 100.2 in the low-fat group, 10 over 100 in the high-fat group, and we calculate this relative risk by dividing one number by the other number, and that gives us an idea of what we call the strength of association, which I think is absolutely crucial when you're looking at epidemiological data, and we'll just talk about that a bit later. So anyway, at the end of the car race, we might see that the Ford goes at 110 kilometres an hour, and the Holden's 111, and it's a reasonably subtle difference, and we might think that maybe the Holden's better, but maybe there could be other explanations because it's so close. Maybe there's something about the driver, maybe it's luck or fluke or what we call random error. And now if we think about a different situation where one car's at 110 kilometres an hour and the other one doesn't get off the line or just slowly ambles through, we kind of, that big difference, that big ratio of speed, that strong difference between the two groups makes us more confident that it's something about the car. And so now we think about how do we take care of the drivers, and the crucial bit of understanding in epidemiology that really drove the area forward was that we could take a bunch of drivers and randomise them to each car, and that would sort out things that we knew about. For example, maybe female drivers are better than male drivers. And the proportions would be the same in both groups. So it takes care of what we call the confounding factors that we know about, but it also does this other magic thing where it takes care of some of the confounding factors like driver performance that we don't know about and can't easily be measured. So that's the magic of randomization. How do we take care of luck? Well, we can, if we've got that very small difference, one way of taking care of the luck aspect is to increase the number of cars. And and by taking the average of the speed in the two groups, we reduce that luck element. But a lot of people don't realise that, and they think that a study with large numbers of participants must be, by its very characteristic, a great study. But actually, if you need 40,000 patients in both arms of your study, it's usually a sign that you're looking for a very small difference. I think something I've been very mindful of recently in the university is that it matters a whole lot who's assessing the progress of these cars and who's designing the race. What we see in academia is an increasing kind of financial relationship between the people doing the studies and the people who stand to benefit from the studies. And it's reasonably easy to let down the tyres in one car and let the car that the sponsor wants to win go with a full tank of gas and air in the tyres. And it's possible to manipulate a study so that your favourite one wins. Okay, so if you think about the sport example, what we really want is a disinterested third party, somebody who really wants to know, is it going to be this car or that car that wins, or this diet or that diet? They have a true interest in either of these outcomes, or which one is best. If they're totally sold on one, generally that's not a good it's not a good recipe for good science, in my view. So summing up, we measure the speed of disease, we call it incidence. You need large numbers to deal with luck or fluke. Small numbers are okay. If there's large differences, deal with small differences by increasing the numbers. And we deal with other factors by this process of randomization. So this is just a small, I'm just going to move into a small case study of how things can go wrong in dietary studies and just how we responded to an issue of saturated fat, which came up. So one of the things we think is important is to measure something that is related to disease, rather than measuring something that might be related to disease and claim that it's as good as disease. So, for example, cholesterol. What we were actually interested in is the speed of disease. And this idea that because the study's large, it must be good. It's usually just that it's well funded. It's chasing a very, very small difference, which may or may not be clinically important. In a lot of studies these days, you see this obsession about p-values. I'm not going to talk about p-values in detail, but what we really need to, what I need to see is what's the speed of disease, the incidence of disease in one group versus another group. The p-value will not tell me that, and that's what, when I read a study, that's what I really want to know. And sometimes when things don't work out for a particular interested party, they'll claim that observational studies are better than randomized studies, which from theoretical kind of considerations just doesn't hold water. So let's just quickly look at this paper which came out, Saturated Fat on Trial in New Zealand. And so basically there's a sort of group of researchers in a southerly town in New Zealand who are pretty attached with their saturated fat causes cardiovascular disease hypothesis. And a meta-analysis came out from the States showing no difference between the high saturated fat and the low saturated fat groups. And they decided they were going to nip this in the bud and that they were going to say, this doesn't mean anything. Saturated fat is still important. So here they are saying, a meta-analysis examining the association between fatty acids and coronary heart disease shows no difference in the disease incidence. But that's wrong, and we don't need to change. So just going down a little bit, these are some of the other arguments. Innumerable controlled dietary studies confirm saturated fat elevates cholesterol compared with polyunsaturated and monounsaturated. We support current guidelines, and the paper by Chowdhury adds no new evidence. So if we think about the car example, our favourite car did not win the race. We know that our favourite car has a bigger engine, so it should have won the race. So what else do they say in their paper? A meta-analysis of cohort studies involving over 900,000 adults shows an association between cholesterol and cardiovascular mortality. So the translations is lots of our favourite cars have bigger engines, so they should have won the race. Bigger engines generally win races, so our car should have won. It's all arguments around the topic, but it's not actually addressing the main issue of what was the speed of disease or the incidence of disease in one group versus the other. What else did they say? Reductions in saturated fat have been accompanied by reductions in mortality in parallel with serum cholesterol. So that, just to translate that into sort of car speak, over the time our car's engine size has got bigger, our cars have generally won more races. And what about our favourite meta-analysis? The one by Jacobson, I don't know, this one comes up all the time if you're arguing about saturated fat. It showed that replacement of saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat was associated with less coronary heart disease. And this was a very small sort of, this was a subgroup analysis, and various other analyses in the same study didn't show the same reaction, but that's okay because we choose the one that supports our hypothesis. So the translation here, our favourite race showed that our favourite car was faster on the first lap if the wind was going the right way. So how did we respond to this? I mean, it was a messy article, very difficult to come up with a good response, but really the philosophy I took was, what was the best race? Was it fair? How does saturated fat compare with other diets? So we just used the Cochrane review, which is uncontroversial, it's published, it seems most people accept its findings, although generally tend to ignore them. It only looks at randomized studies, so we know that all these other characteristics that we worry about are balanced between the two groups when they compare low saturated fat with usual care. And we considered total mortality because overall mortality is, from an epidemiological perspective, has the least measurement error. Most people between different countries can tell whether some person is dead or alive, and there's usually not a lot of inter-rater reliability problems with that. But other things like cardiovascular disease, they have different definitions between countries, between studies. So to us, that's the best evidence on this issue. So what do we see? We see a rate ratio of 0.98, which is basically 1, and the confidence interval includes 1. So basically it's saying there was no difference in those that were low saturated fat compared to usual care. But was the race fair? And this is the really interesting. I used to think that this area was totally boring, but because of the more you look, the more you see. And this issue of publication bias, I think, is very interesting. Basically, for each individual study, you do a plot of the individual odds ratio with the standard error, which is related to the sample size of the study. And you should see a lovely sort of funnel-shaped with a symmetrical distribution of the studies, the smaller studies particularly, and if there's bias, you see fewer studies, particularly down in this region, where the results are unfavourable, and what you can do is just leave those results in the file drawer. Nobody needs to worry about them, and publish the ones on this side which tend to support your hypothesis. So the other issue was, how does saturated fat compare to other evidence? Well, we use these various criteria: strength of association, consistency, Saturated fat ranks 24th out of 27 dietary risk factors. So in terms of, it's a weak, in terms of overall scientific coherence, it's one of the weakest. Okay, I'll just, falling a little behind, some quick tips about what I've discovered recently on the low-carb journey. Salt, the salt thing that Steve talked about, really going for gold on the salt has improved my low-carb life a lot. Just sort of feel a little less lightheaded and giddy. So I think if you haven't explored that, really go for it. The other, I found this book quite useful, just really practical sort of comfort food kind of stuff. Take an interest in omelettes. There's a free Kindle book. Really changed the breakfast. Suddenly I had all this sort of varieties of omelette that I could eat. The other thing which is buy a blender. This is one the kids over, is just a bit of cream, almond flour, spinach, berries, coconut, yogurt, water, a bit of stevia, and the kids are your best friend. So thank you very much for your time.